our vision at VIA is really a car-free city.
And the question that you have imposed is this complementary or is this rivalry, is there competition? And when we look back into the huge mega trends that we have seen in the past 10, 15 years, the urbanization, we see an increasing density, not only of people, but also of mobility needs. And mobility is a basic need of every society, every economy. But we also have seen for the past 30, 40 years that we have built our cities around the car. And if we are here at the IAA Mobility and we call the car an automobile, then we also see the car is not that mobile anymore, it's more autostatic, because it stands still for 23 hours per day in the average, either in a traffic jam or on a parking structure. So the question is, how can we convert our inner cities to be more fluid and more agile when it comes to pedestrians, micromobility, and bicycles? Speaking for the bicycle industry, I can say we have done our part of the job. We have brought more people on riding bikes through electrical bikes, because people love to ride bicycles, and with an e-bike we take the excuses away not to ride a bicycle. So it's too long, it's too stressful, it's too steep. So people love to ride bicycles, but we see in the inner city there is too much traffic. So there is the fear of a lack of safety, and if we don't provide an infrastructure where the infrastructure is in competition right now between cars, pedestrians, cyclists and micromobility, so somewhere we have to be more bold and more courageous to convert our inner cities.
I love it. So we're taking the competition, we're trying to make friendship emerge out of these competitions that are currently in place. Over to the next speaker with the same question, and we have here Mr. Stefan Marxreiter, who is the Vice President of Business Development at Qualcomm CDMA Technologies. Over to you.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you for the introduction. So the question is really interesting, and what we see right now in the market is a big transition and a big disruption in the automotive market. So it's a big drive for digitalization, driven mainly by the electrification. So all car manufacturers go to electrified cars, they go to connected cars, they bring connectivity in the cars, but what the final key driver of that is of course the user. The user needs, they want different content, they want to have content in the cars, they want to have safe driving, they want to have autonomous driving. This is the key drivers there. What we in Qualcomm see as our vision for the future, so we see the future car as a place where a lot of content is really consumed by the drivers, by the passengers, and where you really are there, you have real-time traffic, you have real-time navigation, but you also have, when we come to autonomous driving, we have basically infotainment and entertainment. You need to entertain the passengers, you need to entertain the driver, otherwise driving is going to be quite boring. What do we do in order to do that? So what is our real mission in Qualcomm? So of course, first we are driving technologies, we are connecting cars, we are bringing new technologies like CV2X, which is connecting vehicles to the cloud, vehicles to vehicles, vehicles to infrastructure, with a lot of use cases that really bring safer driving, bring less congestions, and that's how from Qualcomm we drive that. We have a prediction that in 2027 we have 75% of the cars that are delivered are connected. They have a TCU, a telecommunication unit. They're going to be connected to the cloud. They bring the content in the car, but also bring the content from the car to the outside, the information. So that is for us the key driver, and that's what keeps me up in the night, and that lets me be happy in the morning and start the work and drive that technology.
Thank you, Stefan. You've taken us from looking at the various modes on the road, introduced by Claus, into the vehicle.
Yes.
And now I want to make a great segue into our next speaker. So our third panelist, Mr. Daniel Deparis, who is the head of urban mobility for Mercedes-Benz. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Maya, and thank you for all of you for being here with us. For me, a good multimodal solution or system is first of all a citizen-centric one. This is the first thing. And I think that we shouldn't forget this point, because so many times we are talking about solution, technology and so on, but we shouldn't forget that we need the people also to adopt them. That's one thing. The second thing is that we truly believe that mobility is context-based. In each context, there is a best solution. And sometimes the same journey can be done with completely different mode of transportation. And not only due to the weather or to whatever, but if you have to drop the kids to school, your journey is a little bit different, but you have a perfect solution in this moment. And we truly believe that sometimes it's the bike, sometimes it's the tram, public transportation, buses and so on, sometimes it's walking, but sometimes also is the car. And what we truly believe is that, and you see it, we really accelerate the electrification in our company, but we truly believe that electrification will be part, of course, of this ecosystem. But as said, context-based mobility, and if you're talking about context, that means that we have to look much more about the data that we have. And if I may, the last word, if we can use all these assets that we have, and the assets are not only, let's say, verticals, as we say, but also data, and connect them together, we will get the flow that we need for more safety, more traffic efficiency, more sustainability, and what all the cities are looking for, more access to opportunities. And I think that this is a very important point that we have to tackle all together.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Adding the point of data, making some informed progress. And this is, again, a wonderful segue to our fourth speaker. So Mr. Jan Leudtke, who is the head of strategic partnerships at VIA. Over to you.
Thank you, Maya, and thanks everyone for coming and inviting us. So maybe first the vision that you asked for. I think our vision at VIA is really a car-free city, which is kind of fun to say actually at the IAA, I have to admit. But we're pretty serious. Like a city where less than 10% of the rides are actually taken by a private car. But in order to reach that, the alternative they have to be attractive enough. They have to be usable enough. Fully agree with what Daniel said on context-based mobility, and there's not a rider that just takes one mode. We all have different trips, and you need the combined alternatives to really be able to make up an alternative to the private car. So we need to make them more attractive, and we need to make the current alternatives more attractive. And we believe that we're part of the solution, not the solution ourselves. As previous speakers have said, just bikes is not a solution, just on-demand shuttles is not a solution, but the mix gives us a chance.
I love it. So we are all part of one potential solution. We're pieces of one big puzzle. And over to someone who's actually working on solving some of that puzzle. So we have here Miss Kirstin Hegner, who is the Managing Director of Digital Hub Mobility.
Hello, and thank you also for joining. As the last person in the row, it's always difficult to add something new. But actually, that's what we do at Digital Hub Mobility. We're part of Europe's biggest entrepreneurship center, Unternehmertum, and we are a neutral NGO that works with cities and corporate partners and startups to get innovation into the street. And I agree with many of my pre-speakers, but people are creatures of habit. We don't need every morning to have a new calculation on how my footprint is. I know after a while that my footprint will be lower if I take my bike rather than my private car to go to work. But as Daniel said, today I still might change my mind. So we believe in urban experiments. We do these urban experiments with the stakeholders that I mentioned to create new solutions and to get people to think about how they actually act. And then when it works, and it does work, then scale it. And that's what we love doing. apart from creating digital solutions also. But not the whole traffic and situation can be changed with apps. You need people to move around in the city, and that's where we want to go.
I love that. So that personal experience, actually touching upon those that are going to be using our technologies, our solutions, and hopefully in an integrated manner. And that really is a good perhaps point for us to pause and have a bit of a conversation. What did we experience now during the pandemic? What type of partnerships have you seen? What type of innovations have you been part of that you think are putting us on track for a multimodal system? And I'll hand it over to Daniel. I see that you're responsive there.
Thank you. I think that what is coming up is the topic of partnering. And it's not a buzzword that is nice to say on a panel, you know, everybody wants to partners and blah, blah, blah. But I think that we have an experience that we are doing right now with Transport for London. We are using data together to map in the city, based on car data, what are, let's say, the hotspots in terms of safety. We don't wait for an accident to happen. That means that we are looking at historical data, but here we have the chance to predict. Based on the assistance system that we have in the cars, we can, if you want, predict some zone where we had near misses, as we call it, and where we see that there is something to do there. Changing the pedestrian area, the crossing line, the traffic lights, whatever. What we see is that if you find the right people, if you talk about the same purpose, and if in this case it's improving road safety, you can really do a lot of things, because then everybody is having a look at what do we have, if you want, in the kitchen. In your kitchen, in my kitchen, in his kitchen, how to cook something which is different with that. And I think that this is the experience that we do. And I truly believe that this partnering is something that will change. This is one aspect. It's in this case based on data, but partnering, I believe it also in terms of electrification, because you can imagine that electrification, for example, we prepare ourselves for 100% electric by the end of this decade, of course where the market allows it, but we see that charging infrastructure, for example, it's always the same example that we take, but it's a very crucial one. Charging infrastructure is something where also here we see partnering. And I think that these are the topics, if you want, that are very important. And the question that maybe might be still open is how to align the speed of implementation. Because all the partners do not have the same speed, which is completely fine, because everybody has his own organization, if I may say like this, or governance. And I think that this is something which is interesting, is how to align speed, how to align the incentives and the efforts together.
It's
very interesting.
But
go ahead, Kirstin.
But doesn't that come back to the question that Claus raised in the beginning, that a lot of ideas can be aligned, but as long as the infrastructure in the city is not geared to other modes, as long as the bike lanes are bumpy, small, and as long as it's dangerous to ride a bike, you won't get enough people out there. And I think we've done some really interesting studies that there's about 34% of people in the large cities like Berlin, Beijing, Los Angeles, and Munich. A third of people, of car owners, actually could quite well do without a car and aren't even keen on driving. That's a huge potential. But since we're all creatures of habit, they still use their cars, and the alternatives are not attractive enough. And I think that's where the first set of alignment would really make a big difference.
Which is also why I really appreciate the first point that Daniel has raised, which is partnering with the city, extracting data to identify hotspots for safety. Absolutely. So Claus, over to you. I mean, you're dependent on having solid infrastructure in cities that would enable your customers to use two-wheelers. Yeah. Tell us more about what have you experienced lately? How do you see a path forward?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really happy that we have a lot of common understanding about our inner cities, and even with the best technology, electric vehicles or autonomous vehicles, we cannot put more cars into the inner city. It's just impossible. So with the traffic situation, we have to think of other ways to provide mobility. And Daniel, I think you used context-driven mobility. I use purpose-driven mobility, because everyone has for his mobility need a certain purpose. If you want to just move yourself in the distance from 0 to 5 kilometers, there is nothing more efficient than a bicycle. We all know that, and we have many studies that, especially in urban areas, the typical commute of 50% of the people is less than 5 kilometers. Even if it's 10 kilometers, an e-bike is the most efficient way to have personal mobility if you don't have to carry luggage or goods. And also when it comes to emissions, the electric vehicle will solve noise and emissions, but it will not solve traffic congestion. And even with the best technology, we cannot. So the question is now, how can we help cities to convert their space faster with more experiments? This is exactly what we discuss also with city planners and city government and mayors. But the administration and the processes are just too slow. And what we learned in the pandemic, people love to cycle, and cities were brave and bold to put up, for example, pop-up bike lanes in Berlin and Paris, for example. But now that we overcame the pandemic a little bit, the braveness is gone and the courage is gone, and now we are going back to the old pattern of taking the car. So what we need is exactly experiments. Experimenting, how can we convert public space and give more space from the car to pedestrians, to micromobility and to bicycles.
And by the way, also to green, to plants. It's also a matter of temperatures in the city. A city with a street with trees will have a 10 degrees lower temperature in the summer. So we definitely also need more trees in the city.
Perfect. And I think that point you're raising on taking these public space and how we've experimented through the pandemic, you're posing a bit of a negative approach, saying, well, we're seeing these being shut down and we need a way forward. I want to turn on this point of infrastructure fitted to last and first mile, to purpose build, to context-based, to Jan, and see how did your microtransit service experience the pandemic? Have you received any special treatment? Are you seeing that being taken away now, as we're, in a way, perhaps, almost out of the crisis?
I don't think we see it go away. So I mean, regarding the partnership thing, I think we saw that too. These partnerships were very valuable, and we very strongly encourage, especially the public-private partnerships, because a lot of the solutions are there, right? That doesn't solve the infrastructure problem necessarily, but there is a lot of solutions that can be deployed. And I would slightly disagree with Klaus that it probably needs more than the experiments right now. I think we really need to scale it, right? And we saw in the pandemic that the existing kind of fixed line public transport infrastructure just didn't work for a lot of people, right? So it brings us back to that point from earlier. The one option doesn't work for everyone all the time, and that is true for all of our services as well. But you need to have it as a kind of dependable solution for people to really adopt and take it, right? So I would strongly suggest that we think a little bit bigger and try to really implement them, and that takes some, as Klaus said, courage, right, on our side and on the legislature side, and money to do that. But yeah, that's what's really needed, and we see that more and more. I wouldn't say that we kind of saw a decline in willingness to launch on-demand shuttles. It's quite the opposite, actually. We see that the pressure on the traditional kind of fixed-line public transport network and the sharp decline in ridership kind of forced a lot of people that were sitting there pretty comfortably to realize that their network is not able to adjust to these very rapid changes in demand and so on, and that they need to make use of all these other solutions that are out there that can make the system as a whole again more flexible. So I look at it fairly positive of how the market reacted, at least from the public transport side that I'm seeing, and I mean as VIA we can't really complain about not having enough projects. It's encouraging. We would like to have them slightly bigger sometimes, but.
Well, I hope that this panel will yield some partnerships that are going to progress on everybody's end, some of the business. And Stefan, you've talked a bit about in-cabin, and you've only briefly mentioned what you're doing outside of the vehicle and to connecting modes, and this is a great bookmark or network.
Yes, and I think we all agree that we need more infrastructure. We need the infrastructure to really realize the multimodal traffic. So, but what do we do in order to what do we need to do in order to do that? We need to have a data-driven approach. We need to drive new technologies like 5G. Otherwise, we will not be able to distribute data, to work on AI, and to bring exactly, as you said, predictive data to the car, or let the car predict data about traffic, about accidents. And if we want less cars in cities, what do we need to do? We need to make driving and the other modes, we need to make them safer. We need to bring also information to bikes. Why are bikes not connected? Why do bikes, for example, not distribute their position to other cars? And the cars are alerted. The cars don't allow drivers to turn right if there is a bike. Why don't we do that? And this is exactly technology we need to bring. We need to accelerate this technology. It's CV2X. Luckily, we have something like that. It's really CV2X based on 5G networks that can be rolled out in cities. We are working all together very strong on the technology itself, on the standardization, and also then on the rollout. What we need really is cities that are rolling it out. We need roadside units. We need also to have, if we want to include also not only bikes, but also pedestrians, we need cameras that are detecting people walking over the roads and then warning other vehicles that they cannot drive there. This is exactly things we need to drive and we need to have in the future in order to make it more safe and to have less congestions, less cars, multi-mobility, and all of that modes enabled.
So these enabling environments, creating enabling environments, I'm pretty sure each and every one of you are going to have their own perspective of what is your main ask from policymakers or from your potential partner companies. But before we shift into those perspectives, I want to move to Kirstin, who is sort of representing that glue, that fluid that goes between these various private-public stakeholders. What do you think constitutes a good enabling environment for transitioning to this networked multimodal system?
Well, just doing it, doing experiments like we do, and then obviously scaling them. We did a small experiment with last year with 10 households to try out other modes. I would have loved to do it with 100 households. We had 10 in one area of Munich. Why not do it with 100 in every area of Munich and in 20 cities in Germany and in other countries? Because if the thing has worked, the solutions might be different for every city, but get people to join in and get people to have the experience. And it's amazing how much publicity we got for the experiment, but it's hard for cities to take it up and actually implement it. So it needs corporates to take those startups along and take the cities along and actually put it in place. Yeah. And there's also, if I may add that, there's still a lot of rivalry in the minds. I mean, I personally also, Klaus, everything under 10 kilometers, I ride the bike, even if it's lousy weather, whatever, as a matter of habit. I just decided 3 years ago to change it. But I get screamed at, I get shouted at in the streets by people who take it as an offense. They drive too far to the right, I can't pass on the right, I drive around them, they get mad at me. So, it's this rivalry that's in a lot of personal heads that we also have to work on.
I really like your interpretation of rivalry, because when we posed the question, I'm pretty sure each and every one of us were thinking about the competitive element between companies. You're taking this into us. Yeah. Individual folks here that perhaps feel like their own mode is the best mode. They should be protected. They should be given that enabling environment, and we're not really climbing up and looking at the future and how do we get to that vision. And Jan spoke about scale. we are touched upon pilots, about really successful experiments. You talked about scale. What is it that you need to reach scale from cities, from fellow companies, from users?
You have to come together. You have to work together. You just have to be willing to do it. It's courage on the part of the cities, because politicians need to be re-elected. And the difficult thing is always that, for example, if you talk about road pricing, I'm personally convinced that road space with a price of 0, in most cases today, 0 is also a price, is too cheap. It will have to increase. Cities that have done it have improved, like Stockholm, but people, especially drivers, obviously, car owners, but also others, were opposed to it before. Once they've put it in, even car drivers are not opposed anymore, because their situation also improves. If they can drive and don't have to sit in traffic jam, they're willing to pay for it. If businesses can do 2 more tasks per day, if small enterprises can do make 2 more visits per day rather than sit in a traffic jam, they're happy to pay a congestion charge, for example. But it's this, afterwards, people benefit from it, and then they agree. More than 70% in Stockholm, but before 70% were against. And it's hard for a politician to overcome this and say, I'll do it anyway.
Well, incorporating the true cost of mobility into the cost of public space and other public assets, this is a very bold statement. Jan, how do you get to scalability with microtransit, for example? What stands in the way?
I mean, I think I agree with everything that was just said. I think it needs this courage to really have this very large upfront investment, whether this is infrastructure or whether this is city-funded on-demand projects for certain user groups or everyone, etc. And you see that in the startup world. You see it. You saw it with bike sharing and scooter sharing and so on. It doesn't work if you put 10 bikes in a city, or if you kind of like look at what demand for that is right now, and then you put exactly that many. You actually need to throw a ton of bikes in the city and make it a system that is usable everywhere for people to adopt it. But that takes money, right? And that takes, if we're talking infrastructure, if we're talking large citywide services, hundreds of on-demand vans or whatever, it takes a lot of money. That is a tough decision to make for legislators, but it needs that upfront investment. You need to put the infrastructure, digitally and physically into place for it to work, and you need to come up with funding for it, and that's the biggest challenge, I think, that I see.
I also believe that cities should be more consequent in collecting their data. I do believe that citizens would be prepared to share their data with the city if they knew it helped to improve their own situation. We share a lot of data with tech companies every day, every one of us. We don't share it with our own cities enough to actually improve the situation, to find the safety relevant spots. And if the car companies would work together with car data, they know everything about where I am in my car. If there would be more cooperation there, I think we could go a long way.
Well, you're touching upon data in cities again, so I think this is a natural spot for Daniel to come and respond to, and then Stefan. But I want to also note that Jan has mentioned investment, including a huge number of modes, of actual physical modes on the road, and that really touches upon Claus. So let's take turns now and have Daniel, Stefan, and then Claus respond to that.
I would really focus on 3 things for scaling, if I may. The first thing is that you have to start with yourself. Before asking the other to do a lot of things, you have to start with yourself. That means that compared to maybe happened a couple of years ago, where only pilot came up, we stopped at alpha test of something, I truly believe that if you do something, try to make it at least for all Europe, as an example, for all regions. That's what we are doing with our road safety solution, is that we have said, okay, it doesn't bring anything to do it only for one city. Do we have the data for all Europe? Yes, we have it. Can we do it? Can we scale it? Yes, we can do it. And we have prepared directly for scaling. which is maybe a bit contradictory to what has been said maybe 5 or 10 years ago, you know? And in this case, this is maybe a learning. This is the first point. The second point is to understand that raw data is not something that you can use like this if you are not, let's say, an expert in the field. If I give tomorrow raw data to a small city in the south of France, sorry for that, but they will tell me, what shall I do with that? You know, that's great, but how to do it? That means that we have to understand that raw data is ephemeral, and we have to understand that what's important are the insights out of it. The, if you want, enriched product out of it. Because this is the only thing to, let's say, make it actionable for people to say, okay, we have it, it's an insight, we have an history, okay, we are sure this is the right thing to do, now we do it. So this is the second point, is to understand that data, raw data is not the solution, as we sometimes hear, give me all your data, I put it in a lake, and then I don't know what I do with the lake. Okay, so, and the third point, and I'm coming back to what you said, we need to understand the power of communities in our world. The expert communities, the citizen communities, the urban players community. And here in this case, the academia is one of them. The real estate, is it possible to separate mobility from e-mobility, buildings, real estate? No, it's not possible. It's linked to each other. We need to understand this. And the third, for me, part of the community is, if you want, all the energy provider. Because I'm convinced, we are working with some of them, I'm convinced that they bring other things to the party that maybe you thought, oh, I didn't know that. And I think that if we understand the topic of citizen community on one side, and not only to make, you know, a questionnaire that I send by email, I get 5 answers and that's it, but really engaging with communities. This is something which is crucial. On one side, the expert community, just to get, if you want, really the essence, you know, to be faster. But the second point is really the citizen community, which is, in my opinion, something that will play even more a role in the future. Sorry for the long answer, Maya.
No, this is excellent. And I think, Stefan, this is actually a great point, because we're talking about stated preferences. We collect data, we interact with each other, we state what we want. We're probably locked in, as Christian noted, into our own behaviors. But you're actually offering a solution to get some revealed preferences through some infrastructure changes that are able to collect data that represents actual behavior.
Exactly. It's very important that we talk about data, how to use the data, how to really adopt data and how to make them usable for everybody, but how to collect the data is also the key. And if we don't start collecting data, we will not be at the point where we can use the data. So if we don't collect it, there will be no way. So what we need to drive is really technology. Again, I have to come back to that point because it's a really important topic in order to get really the data. It's the technology underlying of that. And you have, nowadays, you have the physical chassis that is newly developed now for electric cars. On top of that, you have a digital chassis that is exactly providing all of that features and key features for collecting data, for driving the data, for reusing data, driving autonomous, driving safe. That's what is there. So I can only say from our side, we are working with all the car manufacturers together to really distribute that and to get features into cars. That's how to collect the data. In order then to use the data, we not have to forget we have to distribute it. Because collecting the data in the cloud, very nice, but how to distribute that? And that's where we have to come back to roadside units. We have to find a way also to warn bicycles, pedestrians, the cars, how to distribute that. And if we don't start looking into that basic technology, that basic standardization, we will not be able to use the data at the end.
Well, this is beautiful because we talked about some policy, enabling policies like access regulation, mobility pricing. We talked about just scaling, thinking big, working in partnership. We talked about digital infrastructure. And we're missing some point here, which is the number of vehicles on the road. How do we bring more clean vehicles, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, a bigger mix into the group beyond four-wheelers that we are so locked into? How would you respond to that? What is that you need?
Yeah, I would like to come from the user experience. We are all mobility users. Everyone here uses mobility in a different modal split. Sometimes pedestrian, public transport, riding a bike, driving in a car. And in the past, and when we look on mobility, it was just too convenient and it was safe to drive in a car on short distances, so coming back to purpose-driven mobility. And the answer is now twofold. If mobility should be convenient, safe, and sustainable, we have to do two things. One is the transformation of the public space infrastructure. We talked about that, but that takes a long time, especially if you want to build in more public transportation, huge investments. So it's easier and faster and less costly to put in more micro-mobility, like kick scooters and bicycles and e-bikes. And besides the infrastructure, I agree with the technology aspect, because we can generate data also with bicycles, also with scooters. We can provide the data. The data has to be managed. I agree with Daniel. Raw data is useless, so we need to manage data and provide services, not only to city governments for city planning, but also for other mobility users. So you talked about vehicle to X. The bicycle industry is working already on bike to X. So basically, the bicycle will also generate data, communicate to infrastructure, communicate to other vehicles, give warnings, send warnings out to car drivers. Why? Because especially riding a bicycle has to be convenient and safe. And this is why we need infrastructure and technology in the combination.
Well, it looks like we've solved the problem. Now we just need to partner. Almost. Before we approach the final question, which is going to be a one-word answer or a two-word answer, I want to open this up and say, do you have anything that you'd like to add to this soup of solutions that we're now boiling? Perhaps something we didn't mention. We talked about hyper-context, local context, hyper-localization. How does that come about, perhaps? How do we create that hyper-local environment?
One word?
Not yet.
No,
Not yet. For me, I think there is a very simple thing. Do you know this? Sometimes you have questions that you don't know how to answer them. There are two solutions. You try to answer them by thinking about it and making some workshops and whatever internally. Or you remember that you have seen a panel, a discussion, a video, a YouTube or whatever, and you have the impression that maybe that could be interesting to reach out these people there and there. And that's the only wish that I see, is that, sometimes you're of course overwhelmed with a lot of emails and demands for a lot of things, but I think that it's incredible how much surprise can happen sometimes. You talk to somebody and then you see, wow, that's great. We follow the same purpose, and you have this and I have that and so on. Wow, we could do something. And I think that this, accept to be a little bit surprised, is maybe an important point.
And Daniel, if I may ask that, I really like what you just said, and that's what happens when we work with startups.
Yeah.
Because they focus on one tiny solution, but you bring them together with two other partners, and something really new comes out of it, and that's what I love.
Yeah, partnering is really the key. It's the key. We have to drive a standard, we have to partner together and drive it together. One alone will not make it.
Which I think is one reason for why many of us have come physically, perhaps for many of us this is the first physical event in quite a while, to interact with each other, to find these magic moments. And in closing, what would each one of you hope that 2022 would stand for? What is that one thing that would make that year as significant as you'd like it to be? in 1 or 2 words? Klaus.
For me, it would be flow in everything we do. Flow is a psychological state of mind or ease of mind. It's not boring, you're actively involved, you're not stressed, and in that window of flow, everything is easy.
Beautiful flow. Stefan.
So for me, it's more data-driven mobility enabled by 5G and a digital chassis.
Not surprising. Daniel.
2 words, less accidents. Because I truly believe that this is so much the highest priority, if I may say it like this. And if we can make it happen, if we can change it, if it's with data, if it's with passive safety, with active safety, with everything which is in the DNA of us, I think that this is something which is the real good thing, if I may.
Jan.
I would say courage. It's been said multiple times today, but I think that's a good one word. Courage to make these upfront investments, courage to share data and don't hold it like this, and courage to call out the shortcomings of your mode and don't think in this siloed approach.
Yeah.
So courage.
Yeah.
And from what we discussed, for me, it would be alignment of the minds on a corporate level, on a company level, but also on a personal level. Let the other person live. People will love to drive their cars, should drive their cars, but let the other ones live too.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the panelists, Kirstin, Jan, Daniel, Stefan, Klaus. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for sticking around and listening in.